stand.
Number 2, C-13, Senator Cormier. Honourable Senators, I move that the bill be read a second time. It is moved by the Honourable Senator Cormier, it's seconded by the Honourable Senator Méville-Deschênes, that this bill now be read a second time. Senator Cormier, on debate. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Dear Senators, I would like to acknowledge that the lands on which we are gathered and from which I am speaking are part of the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Colleagues, we live in a Canada that is proud of its cultural diversity and rich in its linguistic diversity. And it is a real privilege for me to speak today as the sponsor of Bill C-13, an act to amend the Official Languages Act, to enact the French Language Use in Private Sector Undertakings Act, Private Sector Businesses Act, and to make related amendments to other acts. In 1988, the Supreme Court of Canada stated in Ford v. Quebec, and I quote, "Language is not merely a means or mode of expression. It colors the content and meaning of expression. It is also the means by which an individual expresses his personal identity and individuality." End quote. It is with these statements in mind that I rise today to speak on this important bill of language rights for the future of language rights in our country.
We have before us a pivotal piece of legislation. Bill C-13 modernizes Canada's official languages regime. As a member of an unofficial language minority community, I am particularly honored to sponsor this bill and see to the final stages of its study and its eventual adoption into law. Force est de constater que la loi sur les langues officielles.
There is no denying that the Official Languages Act has had many positive effects on our lives, on the lives of our families, and on our Francophone, Francophile, and Anglophone communities. This act has helped define the Canada of today and is a pillar of our parliamentary democracy. Its positive effects continue to be felt across the country by Acadian, Franco-Ontarian, Franco-Manitoban, Francescois, Franco-Albertan, Franco-Columbian, Franco-Ténois, Franco-Yukonese, and Franco-Nunavois families, as well as among English and French-speaking families in Quebec. As minorities, Canada's official language communities have been shaped by the dynamics of resilience, resistance, alliance, and inclusion. And we are all winners, colleagues, when we have equal access to both official languages. Having two official languages for living together in Canada fosters the development of our communities and strengthens relationships between all Canadians. The Official Languages Act is thus an important part of Canada's political, social, and constitutional landscape. Many of us have witnessed the evolution of official languages rights since the first act was passed in 1969. Our two official languages have been an integral part of Canada's history since its founding, but were strengthened by the adoption of the first Official Languages Act. Let's remember that it started in 1963 when the Government of Canada created the Royal Commission on Bilingualism and Biculturalism. This commission undertook a review of the state of bilingualism in the country in order to respond to the concerns expressed by Francophones, particularly with regard to inequalities experienced within the federal government.
It was further to the recommendations of the Laurendeau-Dunton Commission that the first Official Languages Act was adopted in 1969, making English and French the two official languages of Canada. This was a watershed moment in the history of our country. The resulting linguistic duality would now shape important parts of the country's image and culture, one that is integral to how most Canadians recognize themselves today. As a result of the Act, the federal government now had an obligation to better communicate with Canadians and provide them services in both official languages. In addition, the Act put in place obligations that promoted access to justice in both official languages and formalized the use of the two official languages in parliamentary proceedings. Depuis, le paysage linguistique n'a cessé d'évoluer.
Since then, the linguistic landscape has continued to evolve in Canada. provincial and territorial governments have been part of the evolution of these language rights. In 1969, for example, New Brunswick declared itself officially bilingual, and to this day it remains the only province that proudly bears this status, although not without challenges. In the Northwest Territories, and Nunavut, not only are English and French recognized as official languages, but indigenous languages are also recognized as such. In 1977, the Quebec government adopted the Charter of the French language. In 1985, the government of Manitoba took the necessary steps to meet its constitutional obligation for legislative bilingualism, and in 1986, Ontario passed the French Language Services Act, which recognizes the right to use French in the Legislative Assembly, obliges the Assembly to pass its law in both languages, and guarantees the right to receive provincial services in French in some of its regions.
Indeed, since the Official Languages Act was first adopted, the 3 territories and all provinces have adopted statutes, policies, and programs that guarantee services in French or that recognize the contribution of their official language minority communities. Significantly, there was also the 1982 adoption of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which, among other gains, guaranteed the right to minority language education, a right that is crucial for the vitality and flourishing of English and French minority communities. In 1988, an amended Official Languages Act was adopted. In addition to preserving the achievements of 1969, this version guaranteed the right to work in the official language of one's choice in federal institutions under certain conditions. In addition, the Act now contained a new part, Part 7, which featured a new commitment by the Government of Canada to advance English and French in Canadian society. The Act also contained a new commitment to support the vitality of official language minority communities, that is, Francophone communities outside Quebec and English-speaking communities in Quebec.
The Official Languages Act was amended again in 2005, in particular under the impetus of Senator Jean-Robert Gauthier, whose memory I honor. The objective was to strengthen Part 7 of the Act by adding the obligation for federal institutions to take positive measures to implement the government's commitment, and to make Part 7 of the Act legally enforceable if this commitment to take positive measures was not met. That being said, since 2005, the Official Languages Act had not been reviewed or amended. Canadians agreed that a review was needed. More over the years, the case law on language rights had become clearer. All these legislative aspects represent the foundation of our language regime. And it is through the implementation of administrative, regulatory, and program measures that the Government of Canada ensures the deployment of its national vision. Colleagues, in reviewing the evolution of Canada's language regime, let us recognize today that Canada's official languages are at the heart of our history, culture, values, identity, and social contract, and that the time has come to modernize this regime for the benefit of all Canadians today and to come.
It's so important to modernize our Official Languages Act now, because we should never lose sight of the fact that the Act is among the reasons why our 2 official languages are spoken and celebrated across Canada today. We can take pride in our official languages, in our language regime, which includes Indigenous languages, and in the resilience, the endurance, and the strength of conviction our 2 official language minority communities have shown over the years. The Act has ushered in significant changes in Canadian society. Indeed, the rate of bilingualism in Canada has increased by 50% since the adoption of the original Official Languages Act. Now, 30-plus years since the last major update, the Official Languages Act is overdue for modernization. And such modernization is necessary to ensure that the Act keeps pace with a society in evolution, one marked by technological, social, and demographic realities that did not exist in 1988.
The bill before us is the reflection of an extensive consultation process. The bill, tabled by the Minister for Official Languages and Minister responsible for the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency, is therefore part of a historic progression that will have evolved in line with the expectations of Canadians. Despite the progress made since 1969 at the federal, provincial, and territorial levels, the fact remains that we must act swiftly to modernize the country's official languages system, while the latest census has created a state of emergency by showing a significant decline in the proportion of bilingual Canadians able to express themselves, live, and work in both official languages.
The bill is the result of consultations with stakeholders across the country, a process that began in 2019. Numerous stakeholders have engaged in this national conversation: parliamentary committees, the Commissioner of Official Languages, community organizations, researchers, professional associations, and unions have all submitted briefs and research reports. And let us not forget the provinces and territories who have shared their perspective, their respective visions, position, and aspiration when consulted. We should also remember that our Standing Senate Committee on Official Languages had already proposed changes to the Act in 2019 in its final report entitled Modernizing the Official Languages Act, the Views of Federal Institutions and Recommendations, and provided important guidance during its pre-study of Bill C-13, which were effectively considered in the version before us. And colleagues, we should take pride in this important contribution to the national conversation from our committee and the Senate. I wholeheartedly recognize and appreciate the vital work of our newly appointed Speaker of the Senate has contributed to our studies on this important matter.
Allow me to leave my text to congratulate and thank our new Speaker, the Honourable Raymond de Gagné. Rigor, commitment, collaboration, and benevolence are the words that come to mind when I think of her contribution to the study of this Act and to the study of official languages generally. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Senator Raymond Gagné, for your precious contribution. The Franco-Manitoban community, the Franco-Canadian community, and the entire country can be proud of you. Thank you.
No one can deny it. Our country has undergone a considerable transformation in the last 30 years, an even greater one since the first Official Languages Act was passed over 50 years ago. Modernization, therefore, not only addresses today's challenges, but it anticipates the challenges we will face in official languages tomorrow.
The bill is the expression of the vision set out in the reform document released by the Government of Canada in February 2021. This vision was articulated in 6 guiding principles, which are the following, and which I feel it is important to present clearly because they form the basis of this new version of the bill. First guiding principle, recognition of the linguistic dynamics in the provinces and territories and of existing Indigenous language rights. This guiding principle stems from the fact that linguistic realities in Canada vary significantly from coast to coast to coast. This is also true of the language regimes in the province and territories. All provinces and 3 territories have adopted legislation, policies, or programs to ensure that they provide services in French or to recognize the contribution of their official language minority communities. There is therefore a diversity of provincial and territorial language regimes that the Government of Canada takes into account in its support for official languages. In addition, there are key areas of intervention where powers are exclusive or shared between the various levels of government, such as education, health, culture, immigration, and justice. Under this guiding principle, the government states its willingness to work with Indigenous peoples to ensure the protection, promotion, and enhancement of their languages. This bill reflects this and provides for a clarification that the Official Languages Act shall not be construed so as to affect the rights, preservation, and enhancement of other languages by explicitly mentioning Indigenous languages and their reappropriation, revitalization, and strengthening.
Guiding principle of the official languages reform calls for providing opportunities to learn both official languages. Canadians have a positive view on bilingualism, and most of them recognize its benefits. However, despite the efforts and expressions of interest of families who want to see their children enroll in immersion programs, the 2021 census has sounded the alarm. The bilingualism rate among English speakers outside Quebec is stagnant. The actual government has supported second language learning for years through agreements with the provinces and territories. That said, it wants to go further and has explicitly recognized its commitment to encouraging access to official language learning in this bill. L'appui aux institutions des communautés.
Support for institutions of official language minority communities acts on the third guiding principle of the reform. Without institutions and services in the minority language, there is no public space in which the minority can live in its language and achieve its full potential. The Government of Canada proposes that the Modernize Act foster the development of the full potential of these communities by supporting the vitality of institutions in key sectors. The government must also provide essential tools for the defense of language rights, such as protecting access to the Court Challenges Program, recognizing in the Act early childhood programs as an integral part of the education continuum, and a strengthened immigration policy that contributes to the achievement of official language objectives. The fourth guiding principle is the protection and promotion of French throughout Canada, including Quebec. This bill recognizes the predominant use of the English language in Canada and North America, and that in this context it has become imperative to protect and promote the French language. The purpose of the proposed act is therefore clear: to advance the substantive equality of status and use of English and French, and to protect official language minority communities. It should be remembered that in matters of language rights, the courts have confirmed that substantive equality, as opposed to formal equality, is the applicable standard in Canadian law. This standard essentially means that the needs of the minority community must be taken into account to ensure equal access to equal quality services for members of both official language communities. In the words of former Supreme Court of Canada Justice Michel Bastarache, the eminent decision in R versus Bolac stated that the purpose of the Act, and I quote, confirms the substantive equality of the constitutional language rights that exist at a given time, end quote. C-13 explicitly states that substantive quality is the standard that should guide the interpretation of the Act. C-13 also enshrines in the Act that language rights must be interpreted broadly and liberally in light of their purpose and remedial character. For example, Section 23 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms is remedial in nature because, according to the courts, its purpose is, quote, to remedy on a national scale the progressive erosion of minority official language communities, and to give effect to the concept of the equal partnership of the two official language groups in the field of education. This principle will guide the interpretation of the Act to ensure greater protection for official language minority communities. The government also recognizes in this bill that the private sector has a role to play in the promotion and protection of French. With the modernization of the Official Languages Act, the government is ensuring that private companies under federal jurisdiction do their part to protect and promote French in Quebec and in regions with a strong Francophone presence across the country. To this end, it provides for rights and obligations to ensure that consumers can communicate in French with certain federally regulated private businesses, and for language of work rights that allow employers to perform their work and be supervised in French.
The fifth guiding principle of the reform calls for the Government of Canada to lead by example by strengthening the compliance of federal institutions. The Government of Canada and its institutions must be exemplary in their implementation of the Act. This bill contains concrete measures to ensure access to the justice system in the official language of one's choice. The bill also contains measures to strengthen the role of the Treasury Board in monitoring the compliance of federal institutions with their official languages obligations and holding them accountable, while building on the role played by the Minister of Canadian Heritage and the Minister's expertise in determining the needs of official language minority communities. This bill also calls for brand new powers for the Commissioner of Official Languages, who currently plays an ombudsman role in enforcing the Act. The Commissioner now would no longer be limited to making recommendations, but would enjoy a range of more compulsory powers, including an order-making power. Enfin, le sixième principe.
Finally, the sixth guiding principle of official languages reform is to ensure that we look beyond the immediate needs of official languages. Clearly, the linguistic landscape is changing, and Canadian society is changing just as rapidly. This bill contains a brand new measure that will ensure the continued relevance of the Act for generations to come. Indeed, it includes a new requirement for periodic review of the provisions and applications of the Act. It reflects a desire to complete an ambitious reform. To be clear, colleagues, the bill provides for new areas of intervention, such as post-secondary education in a minority context, francophone immigration, bilingualism of Supreme Court judges, the right to work and be served in French in private enterprises under federal jurisdiction, and a new governance framework for its implementation. Bill C-13 therefore makes important advances to ensure the sustainability of our two official languages and the vitality of our official language minority communities across the country. Allow me to highlight some of the key provisions of this bill.
The bill provides an important adjustments that include measures to strengthen the oversight of the Act by the Treasury Board Secretariat, which, for its part, has a mandate to monitor and report on federal institutions. An amendment at the other place further establishes the ministerial role for coordinating the Official Languages Act with the President of the Treasury Board. The Minister of Canadian Heritage will continue to have a government-wide coordination role in terms of the preparation and delivery of the government's 5-year strategies, also known as the Action Plan. The bill seeks to balance the various roles and responsibilities while ensuring that the federal government remains above reproach and free from any perception of conflict of interest. This issue was raised by former Commissioner of Official Languages Graham Fraser in his 2008 report, in which he stated that, and I quote, "Central agency should also avoid being judge and jury to their own proposals, and that is why they should avoid taking on program responsibilities." Professor and distinguished fellow Donald Savoy echoed this concern in his speech at the closing summit of the Cross-Canada consultations on the next action plan for official languages, stating that, and I quote, "Central agencies cannot be both judge and jury with respect to their efforts," end of quote. Thus, the bill provides for a combination of responsibilities that builds on the respective strengths of these two institutions, a formula that has the advantage of having several ministers work together to raise awareness of official languages issues and to find solutions. Le projet de loi C-13 prévoit.
Bill C-13 also provides for measures that significantly strengthen Part 7 of the Act, which provides for the advancement of English and French. By substantially strengthening this part, and by specifying the nature and scope of the positive measures that must be taken by all federal institutions in order to foster the development of our English and French linguistic minorities and to promote English and French in Canadian society, this bill takes into account the demands clearly expressed during the consultations. C-13 specifies that positive measures must be concrete and taken with the intention of having a positive impact on the implementation of certain government commitments, including the commitment to protect and promote French.
We'll add to the Act a list of concrete examples for positive measures for the benefit of federal institutions. Thanks to the bill, the Treasury Board will also be better equipped to monitor the compliance of federal institutions with their duty to take positive measures. More concretely, the bill will ensure that the Treasury Board, in consultation with Canadian Heritage, establishes new policies and regulations to support federal institutions in taking positive measures while holding them accountable for fulfilling their obligations. It is important to note that an amendment made in the other place will further ensure that the government considers the addition of linguistic clauses in bilateral agreements with provinces and territories. This was a significant request from communities that many senators, I think, have heard. Ainsi, les institutions fédérales devront
Thus, federal institutions will have to effectively consult the communities in taking positive measures in the following manner, and I quote, gather relevant information, obtain the opinion of the English and French linguistic minorities and other stakeholders concerning the positive measures being consulted, provide the participants with the relevant information on which these positive measures are based, consider their opinion in an open and serious manner, and be prepared to modify these positive measures, end of quote.
An important principle of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms embodied in the Official Languages Act is the advancement of substantive equality of English and French in Canada. One of our two official languages faces an inescapable reality, and here, of course, I'm referring to French, which is a minority language and quite vulnerable, I might add. Demographic realities on the North American continent have long been an important challenge for the defense of the French language in Canada. In recent years, the French language in this country has experienced a significant decline. Despite efforts undertaken over the past few decades, the latest census data confirms that the demographic weight of Francophones continues to shrink. We must therefore ensure that any modernization of the Act considers the fragile reality of the French language in Canada and includes concrete steps to counteract its decline. So the bill contains concrete measures to protect and promote French, including a requirement to adopt a Francophone immigration policy, complete with objectives, targets, and indicators to guide government actions. The bill also supports sectors essential to the vitality of official language minority communities and protects and promotes strong institutions serving those communities. Le gouvernement du Canada est également
The Government of Canada has also recognized that the private sector has a role to play in the protection of French, and for this reason the bill enacts a new act, the Use of French in Federally Regulated Private Businesses Act, to create a new regime for private sector businesses under federal jurisdiction. I'd like to point out at the outset that the legislation contains amendments adopted unanimously in the other place that reflect an agreement in principle with Quebec and, importantly, demonstrate cooperative federalism in order to harmonize our language regimes in the protection and development of the French language, while fully preserving the rights of English-speaking Quebec communities. All these proposals aim to make official language minority communities places where people can live fully in the official language of their choice. It's intended that this new regime will provide greater protection for French for the benefit of French-speaking Canadians and will have the effect of enhancing the vitality of official language minority communities in Canada. Colleagues, Canadian society is changing rapidly. Yet, the Official Languages Act has not been substantially reviewed since the late 1980s. The bill provides a mechanism for a 10-year review of the Act to ensure that it remains current and has a positive impact from generation to generation. Bill C-13 is only one part of the reform of the official languages regime. Indeed, the bill contains only the legislative measures shared by the Minister for Official Languages in February 2021, when the public document on reform was unveiled, which also included regulatory and administrative measures. According to the information I've received, the process of making regulations could be initiated as soon as the bill receives royal assent. These regulations are critical to the implementation of the government's vision and to the implementation of certain key measures. In practical terms, reform begins with royal assent, as we know, but it will not be fully implemented until regulations are made and certain measures and new regimes are subsequently implemented through orders in Council. A regulation will clarify the terms and conditions for the taking of positive measures by federal institutions. Regulations will provide a framework for the new regime for private enterprises under federal jurisdiction, and another is planned to set out the new scope of application of administrative monetary penalties, one of the new powers available to the Commissioner of Official Languages. A series of administrative measures is also planned as part of the government's vision for this bill. These will be part of the Pan-Canadian Horizontal Strategy on Official Languages for the years 2023 to 2028, better known as the Action Plan for Official Languages. While this flagship official languages strategy is autonomous and self-sufficient, it is implicitly linked to Bill C-13, in that one of the main vehicles for implementing the administrative and legislative measures of the reform. Colleagues, I think I can say that Canadian Parliament, along with so many Canadians who are proud of their official languages, are committed to the modernization of this bill.
Excited that we can now study this bill. Like you, I'm eager to see a modernized act that will protect the French language and slow its decline in Canada, one that will promote and enhance the vitality of official language minority communities, and one that will advance the substantive equality of English and French in Canada. The protection of minorities is foundational principle of our Constitution, and our chamber serves as a forum to our linguistic groups. Je tiens à souligner le travail.
I would also like to acknowledge the invaluable work done by the parliamentarians in the other place and members of the Standing Senate Committee on Official Languages, who've been studying the issues associated with modernizing this quasi-constitutional law since 2017. Thanks to your unwavering commitment, dear colleagues, we are now in a position to proceed with this important piece of legislation for Canada. In closing, colleagues, and on a more personal note, let me say that our official languages, our Indigenous languages, and all the other languages spoken in this vast land of Canada deserve to be cherished, spoken, protected, celebrated, and nurtured. The maintenance, use, promotion, and development of our two official languages must be done with an acute awareness of the importance of ensuring the survival and development of Indigenous languages. Like all languages, our two official languages move and are influenced by other languages. The words that make up our two official languages are colored by a variety of tones, which is what makes them strong and rich. As the Acadian writer of French origin, Françoise Angarde, wrote, "A language is celebrated all year round. It is polished, it is learned and deepened. It's defended when necessary. It is celebrated when possible. And first and foremost, it is used." Thank you for listening.